Okay, everybody, good evening. I'm Michael Wright and I'm the canine behaviourist. Welcome to my stream. I'm going to be here every Wednesday at 7 o'clock on British Standard Time, and I'm going to be talking about all things dog, really behaviour, training, any issues relating to dogs. And the aim is to hopefully help people understand a little bit more about their dogs and how best to live with them, and what we should be doing with them. So I welcome any questions that any viewers may have. I don't have any at the moment, but maybe when I've done this a few times, somebody might tune in. But anyway, I'll be sharing it to Instagram anyway after I finish rambling. So as you can see from my title, I'm going to be talking about dogs and shock collars today. Not just shock collars, but any aversive training method or method of dealing with our dogs, of which there are many. But I'll talk a little bit about dog collars, shock collars first, because they are something that is in use quite widely throughout the world, really. And we have them in this country. They've been banned in some areas. I think Scotland banned them. Um, I'm not too sure that we banned them actually in England. We might possibly have done, but I know that an MP who wasn't too far from here in the next door county, she voted against shock collars and condemned them. But we then found out later on that she'd been to a trainer, and her trainer had recommended the shock collar as a wonderful way of training our dogs. So she uses a shock collar on her own dog. So I won't say any more. I'll let you make your minds up on that. So let me just paint a picture for you. So at home, you've got children, and they're relatively young. So maybe they're 6 or 7, maybe younger, maybe slightly older. Now, you've got a garden, and you've got a garden in the front of your house, where they like to play. But unfortunately, there's not a fence in that garden. So they quite frequently, when they see something that interests them, they go dashing out of the garden, onto the pavement, or maybe even close to the road. So you get tired of shouting for them to come back, and you think, well, maybe there's another way I can prevent them from doing this. So what you do is you put a cable around your garden, which is buried in the earth. You put a nice little comfortable fluffy collar on your child around their neck, a nice necklace, and then you program that necklace. So if your child approaches the boundary and crosses the boundary, your child gets a nice electric shock, and that pulls them up short and they don't go any further. Or you might be out the window and you're watching your child and they're getting a little bit too close to the border, so you can press your button on your device and you can shock your child from a distance. Again, putting them off and going out into the road or into the pavement. Wonderful. So that's job sorted, isn't it? We've found a way of distance shocking our children. That stops them and that keeps them safe. Now, by now you're probably saying this man is a lunatic. Well, of course I am. I wouldn't dream of doing that to a human being, and definitely not a child. So why on earth do we think it's okay to do that to our dogs? The picture you can see behind me here, my background, is a dog with a shock collar on. Now what you can't see in that picture is that shock collar has a couple of prongs, and they're digging directly into the dog's neck. And it works in exactly the way as I've just described. If that dog's getting, if you've got a hidden boundary, and the dog goes near, it gets a shock, an electric shock into its neck. If you also use your control box, you can actually shock the dog whenever you feel like doing it. Now, the exponents of this, trainers that do this, and there are still many that do, unfortunately, they say this is a safe way and a humane way of controlling our dogs. No, it's not. It's an inhumane, barbaric, cruel, horrendous thing to do to any living creature, particularly our dogs. The dog doesn't understand where it comes from. It's frightened, it's terrified by it, it's put in pain by it, and they should be banned worldwide, really. It's an appalling thing. And I find it shocking that we still have lots and lots of trainers that think that's a jolly good idea. Rather than spend time working with the dog and teaching your dog recall and teaching it to stay, etc., we'd rather just go the whole hog. Let's cut through any effort and let's just shock the dog and beat it into submission. It's a horrendous thing, and if any trainer suggests that's a good thing, turn around and run away with your dog as fast as you possibly can. Okay, so that's shock collars. On a similar theme, but maybe not quite as shocking potentially, is a spray collar. Now, a spray collar works in a similar sort of way. So that is a battery powered device as well. But this time you have manual control with your little control box. And the object is you put a spray in this thing that the dog doesn't like, and it makes the dog uncomfortable, doesn't like smelling it. So when the dog is doing something you aren't happy about, instead of controlling it with commands and proper training, you press your button and it sprays this aroma, and the dog doesn't like it, and then the theory is it stops doing it. Again, the dog has no idea where that's coming from. It's an unpleasant thing. It's, again, not quite as barbaric as using a shock collar, but it's still pretty unpleasant, and I'd highly recommend not going anywhere near them. Not going anywhere near them. So there's the two types of collars. Now there's another type of collar, of course. Well, there's two more types of collar actually. One is the spike collar. You'll see that used often with a powerful breed, and the object there is you put a spiked collar, so the spikes are internally round the dog's neck, pointing inwards onto its skin, a bit like this prong on this dog we're looking at in that picture I've got showing. And the idea is you yank on it, and that collar tightens, and these prongs actually dig into the dog's neck. Now just imagine that. It's a little, again, like me putting on you some barbed wire, a wrap of barbed wire, and I tug on it when I want you to stop doing what you're doing. Cruel, horrendous things to do to a dog. So that's a spike collar. Used maybe not quite as much in this country, but I'm sure they are. But if you look in the States, you'll see them used quite often. Okay, spike collar. Now today I saw the last type of lead or collar that I wouldn't recommend using either, and that is a choke collar. Now a choke collar again works in very similar ways. You impinge the dog, so the choke collar slips and tightens, basically. That's the idea. And of course, if you don't put them on in the correct way, they can be very dangerous anyway. But nevertheless, I met two dogs today, and they were both had shock collars on. They were setters actually, lovely dogs. They both had shock collars on fairly long leads, and one of these dogs was trying to come say hello to me. And while it was doing that, of course, it was pulling on its choke chain, and the choke chain was just pulling and tightening on it, and the dog was struggling to breathe. So I had to say to the owner, could you just relax the lead, because this dog, can you not hear its breathing? It was laboured, so it was being choked, therefore a choke collar. And again, do I recommend using this? Of course I don't. All of these things are examples of aversive ways of training our dogs, which are lazy. They have a lasting behaviour and a psychological effect on our dogs, and just don't do it. You can end up with a fearful dog, an aggressive dog, a dog that shuts down. Just train them properly, and if you train them properly, you don't need any of these things. Okay, so that's collars. I'm looking down because I've got a little bit of a list here, because I I'm not going to younger. I tend to forget things, so I'm working through some of these things just so I don't forget what we're talking about. Here's another type of restraining thing is the halty. I've mentioned this in my discussions once in a while with this because it's another quite unpleasant thing. So the halty is basically a collar that's got a strap attached that goes across the dog's nose, and then it's attached to the collar, and as the owner pulls it, the halty pulls down hard on the dog's nose. Dogs' noses are very sensitive areas, very complex parts of their anatomy, and putting a strap on them and pulling them down is not a good thing. Unfortunately, if you go into any vet, you'll see halties hanging up all the time, along with the extending leads and whatever. They go almost hand in hand. Again, excuse me, it's a lazy way of training your dog. You know, it's a shortcut. It causes the dog discomfort. And most of these things, when you see them, they're often riding right up into the dog's eyes. Very unpleasant, very uncomfortable. But hey, it stops them pulling because, to be fair, they do stop them pulling to a reasonable degree. But there are easier ways and more humane ways and kind ways to be doing that. That's another aversive technique. Maybe not as aggressive as some of the other ones I've talked about already, but nevertheless, it's still an aggressive technique and one to be avoided. Okay, what are some of the other things people do with their dogs? And all these used to be common. I'm going to go through here, but they're not uncommon now. People still think this is a good way. Good old Caesar Milan. Now, if you ever heard of Caesar Milan, the dog whisperer, some of the stuff he does kind of has a place, I think, but quite a lot of the aversive type techniques that he tends to use, I wouldn't recommend. But you've got to countenance that a little bit with. Often he's dealing with severely aggressive dogs, and the techniques such as he's used not shock collars, but he's used spike collars before. He's not made it very plain, but he has. But I'm not sure he does that anymore. But he's got a little technique where he flicks his leg behind him and kicks the dog. Basically, doesn't kick them hard, but he kicks them nevertheless to get them in line. Now, of course, a lot of people have seen that and they think, well, that's a really good way of doing it. Well, I can kick my dog, and no, it's again, that's an aversive technique. You're doing something that potentially can hurt the dog, or at least frighten the dog, to get it to react accordingly. You replace that sort of behaviour with some positive behaviour and some kind training methods. There's plenty of them. Right. Another one's forcing your dog down. This is still quite common. That's where you literally get the dog and you force it to the ground and you force it onto its side, and you basically pin the dog down. And the object of that is to dominate the dog, let it know who's boss, and you force it to lie there until it's calmed down. Again, that's a very aggressive way to deal with a dog, and you don't need to do that. It's an unacceptable way of doing things, and you do run the risk of that dog really flipping and getting stuck into you. So again, I wouldn't recommend it, not necessary. You probably heard this from your grandparents or older people that have had dogs. Well, you know, if I get home and my dog's had an accident in the house and he's messed in the house a little bit, I rub his nose in it. That teaches him, and he, you know, if that happens, I'm going to do this to you. And it's another dominant type thing. I rub his face in it, and that'll stop him doing it. No, it doesn't. All it does is terrify him. And he thinks, what the hell is he doing that to me for? What have I done? You know, to the dog's mind, he hasn't done anything wrong. He's been in a situation where he's had to relieve himself. Nobody's there, and he's done what he has to do. We don't punish them for that. We teach them in a very gentle way by routinely putting them out and rewarding them when they do what we want them to do. That's what we're looking for. We don't punish them because they've done something. A lot of this is about punishing, controlling, and hurting dogs, basically, in the guise of training and um, adjusting a dog's behaviour. None of it is good. Another one is shouting at the dogs. I'm guilty occasionally of that. I sometimes when Ziggy's barking at the dog that's barking down the road, I sometimes can get a bit irritated and shout, but then I have to pull myself back and say, well, hang on, the Ziggy, my dog, isn't shouting and barking to annoy me. She's shouting to tell me that there's another dog barking, or there's something happening, or somebody's coming to the house, etc. So in her mind, she's doing our job. So we don't need to be shouting at them. And in fact, shouting at a dog to try and get it to do what you want it to do is counterproductive, and again, it frightens them. I'll give you an example. If I was over a park not long ago, and there was a lady shouting desperately at her dog, and it's a fairly old dog, about 10 or so, a spaniel. And this lady was shouting at the dog, come here, not aggressively, but she was, and she was a bit beside herself, and the dog was just plain ignoring her. Because as far as the dog, the signal the dog was getting is that person shouting at me in a very loud, somewhat aggressive way. Why would I want to go over there? Because I might get hit, or that something might happen that I don't want to happen. So I'm going to stay over here. So I just asked the lady just to relax a little bit, and I called the dog. And this time, all I did, I got down low to the ground in a very relaxed manner, and I called the dog gently, made a bit of a fuss, waved my arms around a little bit, said, come on then. And the dog looked at me, never met me in its life, didn't know me from Adam, and he came up to me, and as soon as he came up to me, I just rewarded him, and I repeated it a few times to her, and I got her to do that, and lo and behold, she came to her as well. And she was just amazed by that. I said, you're not being unpleasant, but to the dog, you're shouting worries it, so it's not going to be coming to you. Okay, because it thinks something might happen. So again, the gentle approach, positive approach, and the rewarding approach, you'd be surprised at how effective that can be. We don't need to be shouting at our dogs. Hitting. I've touched on hitting with the kicking. We don't hit our dogs ever. Ever. It's as simple as that. They look to us to look after them, to care for them, and hitting them because they've done something, or you think they might do something, is wrong on so many levels. It's just wrong. And I'm amazed that more people aren't savaged and attacked by dogs that have been hit, because their defensive response is either going to be to cower and be so used to it. It's called learned helplessness. They don't fight back. They just take it, and that's the only form of human contact some dogs get, being hit. It's horrendous. So we don't hit our dogs. It's not clever. It's not big of a person to do that. You treat them with kindness. Period. Yanking on leads falls into the same thing. You don't need to be grabbing a lead and yanking a dog to get it to do what you want it to do. If you treat a dog with positive training methods and with kindness, and you reward them for doing what you're looking for them to do, you'd be surprised that none of these things that I've covered do you need to be doing. Not a single one of them. So seek out a trainer that can help you, that uses positive, kind training methods. Read a few books. There's plenty of them out there. Good books that give you good guidance. And as far as trying to adjust the dog's behaviour by putting a shock collar on it or a choke chain on it, if you are finding it difficult and hard to train your dog or to have it behave as you would like it to behave, seek out either a trainer, or if it's a behavioural issue, seek out something like me who will guide you on how to adjust the dog's behaviour and help you understand why the dog's doing something. Okay, that's basically it, I think. The take home here is none of these aversive methods are recommended. they are potentially dangerous to your dog. They are potentially going to affect the dog's behavior in a very bad way, and they're going to impact the quality of your dog's life. And if you care for your dog, which I know most of you do, if you care for your dog, you won't consider any of these types of methods or training. And if you're dealing with anybody that is trying to help you and they recommend anything of this nature, you go in the opposite direction, and I mean very, very fast. Just about turn and head on out of there and find someone that's appropriate or is recommended to you. Okay, so I'm going to be here on 7 o'clock every Wednesday. I welcome people to come along. We have a chat room. You can ask me questions and I'll try to answer them if I can at the time. You can find me on Twitter at cbehaviorist. You can find me on Instagram. That's canine_behaviorist. I think that's right. Yep. And my website you'll see on the screen here, www.thecaninebehaviorist.co.uk. So take a look there. You'll find lots of stuff in my blog. I'm able to help people locally by visiting them directly within safe distances and all that sort of stuff. If people need help and we can't really get together, which is always the best way, but in these difficult times that's not always possible, I'm quite happy to do a video consultation with you. I'll get you to fill in a fairly lengthy form online which gives me lots of information. If you're able to video your dog to show me behavior, you can send that to me as well, and we can have a couple hour session online where we can really get to the bottom of any issues you may have. So I think that's it for now. Well, thank you for watching this video. I think most of you will watch this on Instagram, which is fine. I'll also share it to YouTube and I'll also share it to Facebook. So hopefully eventually people will come along and maybe we can have a live chat where we can answer some of your questions. Okay, well, I think that's it, and bye bye for now.